How are you, Misha?
Oh, good. I didn't have to do that screen thing. Good, Jess. How are you?
Good. I'm really happy that I can see you clearly and I can hear you clearly because we've had some internet issues this morning.
We have, and actually, if I was to answer honestly, good's not probably quite the answer. I'm probably slightly frustrated and annoyed,
Yep,
which will be interesting considering the topic that we're talking about.
I hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I haven't had the frustrations, obviously, because they're not on my end, but it's interesting and we'll perhaps put that aside for a second.
Yep.
And maybe people that are going to be listening to our podcast is just going to be wondering why are these two talking? Why are these two together and what have they got to say? So I thought perhaps we'd start with just sharing a little bit of our journey, like how we met.
Mm. Um, well, we met doing a NLP course, so neuro linguistic programming course, and we actually just gravitated towards each other because we both really wanted to study all the time and we wanted to practice our techniques like
Mhm.
crazy. We just didn't. We were like, we're going to get this, and we just, and quite frankly, I think we just wanted to make the best of the time that we had, the opportunity that we had to explore all of the techniques we were using.
Mhm.
And I think we both also felt safe with each other because there's a lot of stuff that you expose about yourself, especially in this course. I can't compare to other courses, but particularly in this course because it's all about embodying your experience and
Mm.
truly understanding what it is that you're teaching or what it is that you will be coaching,
Mhm.
how that affects you. It will obviously affect how it's going to affect clients, future clients as well. So
Mm.
yeah, I think you and I just had this natural gravitation towards each other because we wanted to get the most out of our experience.
Yeah. And I remember the early days, we were really insecure about what kind of coaches and the pressure that we were putting on ourselves. I remember the kind of pressure we talk about the pressure that we were feeling as coaches to get it right and if we were going to be of any use and what do we do when we were coming across clients that were perhaps a little bit more challenging. And I remember we did some role playing, quite a lot of role playing, where we would just end up in tears laughing,
Yeah.
um, just because we were just trying to be stubborn and trying to be difficult on purpose to see how that challenged us as coaches.
Yeah, it's
um,
interesting again thinking about this topic because I haven't really quite found that, that it's been at this stage, I wouldn't say that I've found clients so challenging and so difficult, especially what we put ourselves through.
Yeah, I think we did the worst case scenario,
Yeah.
but that kind of made it easier.
Yeah.
Um, and also just we're off topic at the moment, but just I do remember having been so difficult with each other when we were practicing, that the actual reality when you have a client is they probably just need a little bit of reassurance most of the time or validation as to what's going on. And here's us thinking we're going to solve huge world problems. Do you get the
Yeah.
sense of that, that it's not really what the clients are after?
Yeah, I think um little did we know though back in those days, well, when we think about like our topic today, little did we know that it wasn't really about trying to get to an outcome or, we've learned that, we've discovered that it's just really about being with the client. But of course, having some tools, but really just grounding yourself and just being with the client and
Hmm.
trying to sort of go on I don't want to use that word, but kind of a journey
Hmm.
to just go through the experience with the person, I think so.
Hmm. And do you think now, looking back, were we trying to play with the odds and give ourselves a lot of experience so that we could feel more in control in the moment instead of sitting with the fear
Yeah.
of perhaps not being good enough as coaches.
Yeah, well, that's always what it's been about, Jess. Yeah, that said the fear, like any in terms of like even the word coaching suggests that you have to be a certain, something. You have to, embody something,
Mm,
does that make sense? Just,
yep,
but really, it's just all fear, like you say, you know,
that's right.
and trying to
So
control the outcome.
exactly. I think that was a little bit of what I'm saying. It was a bit of trying
Mm,
to control the outcome, which
yeah.
is basically what we've been going through this morning in trying to get stable internet access as well. Um, so so you've been on this NLP journey and I've been on this NLP journey now. Wow, 4 years. And we've taken it to different places, you and I. But ultimately, we've just continued to stay in touch and sometimes weekly get together and just chat about stuff. And I remember speaking to a few friends, and including my sister, and they demonstrated a lot of interest as to what do you guys talk about so much, especially the shadow work that you do, or, what do you talk about with the skills? Like, and then, it does sound great that we should be able to put this out and see if it interests people, if it helps people.
Well, I think it helps us. So if we've been like, we do it both to, like you just said, we have conversations, just in general, but it's always around personal development in some way or another.
Mm,
And then sometimes we get stuck on things. So then we contact each other and work through the processes together and usually get ourselves through some pretty big stuff. So I think that we both can see how beneficial that work is. We've been able to push through a lot of things, and beliefs and stuff like that. So I think we've both gotten to the point where we've helped each other so significantly over those 4 years, and developed tools. And it's like, well, how can we put that out there too and share
mm,
that with other people because it's been so beneficial to us.
mm. I agree. It has been pretty significant, especially the topics that we've looked into, and they always seem to be about doing the work in ourselves. It begins with this has happened, someone's done something to me, or this has happened outside of me, and then eventually it ends up just being work that we've got to do on ourselves about what we're allowing, or what we're accepting, or what we're not allowing.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like you just said, in the earlier days, it was always an external focus. Why is this person this or that person that, and trying to find this way to get around that. But now we pretty much just cut to the chase and say, all right, these things come up. What's happening in me?
Yeah.
And we get there so much quicker as a result because it's just like all the noise. Remember all the stories? Like we learnt that in the beginning of NLP, the looping that people will do, the stories and all that sort of stuff. But now we just cut the stories out pretty much. So it's like we don't tell them anymore. It's not this case of like this person, this and that person, and they made me feel. I mean, we do a little bit because we're,
Mhm.
but then we just go, hang on, what's coming up for me? And we just get there quicker
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
result.
We have cut a
Mm.
lot of the bullshit out, even our own stories that we've got in our own heads and our own understanding. So,
So,
Misha, we kind of decided, the two of us, that the topic of control was going to be one of the first things we spoke about, because it was kind of coming up in both of our lives. What was happening for you?
um, I haven't thought about it too deeply, but I know that control is quite a big thing. And since we decided that, I've really been able to see how much control arises in our everyday life. Like it's a significant part of my day. There's so many ways that it works. So many ways that it works at this kind of, I've mentioned it before, but an insipid kind of way where you're not even, I mean, there's the obvious ways that control, there's obvious ways that control works in our lives, like the way it plays out. But I think that just the importance of understanding control is, well, as I suppose around resistance, like how much resistance, how much it prevents us really from moving through a thing, through flowing through a thing, through and the opportunities we miss out on when control is a big part of our, when we allow control, or when we're not aware that we're trying to control outcomes all the time. So even, for example, when with this internet thing this morning, I could feel in my body getting frustrated and annoyed, just because I couldn't control the internet or control how the podcast is going to come off, for example. So I started to get anxious, and so this is just one way that control can actually get in the way and put you in a state, not a very useful state, that you just don't need to be in, because quite frankly, it doesn't matter. It's just going to be what it is, and it's still going to be good. It's the content's going to be good. So that's just one way, but there's really insipid ways that control can work under the in a way that you can't see, in a really disguised way that you can't see, that again limits possibilities for us, limits just possibilities. That's all I want to say. And if anything, just drags things on, rather than having opportunities.
That's right. And I think I like the way that you said it doesn't need to be there, because it's there for a good reason. And you and I have both done a lot of work in NLP where we know that there's positive intentions for things. And we know this well in NLP, that there's a positive intention behind you wanting this for yourself and for the podcast.
Sure. Yeah. There definitely is a positive intention. And I would definitely love to have a conversation around positive intention one day, but soon. Because that's, as we both know, it's vital. It's really important in understanding that. But I think it's just understanding control, really, around how it shows up in our day. And despite the fact that there is a positive intention, it's still just its limitations, I suppose. And what do you think about that?
What do you mean about its limitations?
Well, I mean, we wouldn't be talking about it if there wasn't limitations around it, that clearly shows up as limitations throughout our day.
Because I'm thinking perceived limitations.
Yeah, they are perceived. Yeah. That, again, another great topic. There's perceived limitations.
But see,
all of that.
in the perceived limitations, you went and found a better, more stable internet connection.
Yeah.
And just then I had to find the technology to be able to delete background noise.
Yeah, exactly. So we can find ways, there's solutions. In fact, that's what the work we do is, solution oriented. It's how do we find solutions? But also in terms of being more useful in your day, recognizing it is a perceived limitation, it's true, but there's no reason for me to get anxious and my body goes into a state, I go into fight or flight, essentially there's this, so it's true, it is a perceived limitation in terms of the work we do and coaching we do. That's what you do, you move people through those things. But also another level is where we talk about control, which is essentially what I was trying to do. That's a real experience I'm having in that moment. I'm having this experience of control. I'm like, I need to control this outcome. My body, my heart rate increases. And under normal, we've all had those lessons around fight or flight. When you're out in the wild, it's fine to have a short burst of adrenaline, and you're running from the lion or whatever when you're a caveman, it's fine to have those short bursts of adrenaline. But the issue with control is is nowadays is that people have long periods of adrenaline and fight or flight, which then becomes unhealthy for you and your body, and quite frankly, not useful.
Mm,
So you're really perpetually in this state of uselessness or not usefulness because you're so focused on this need to control an outcome.
mm,
So, and yes, that's all those things you mentioned. That's what coaching's all about. You try to coach through the perceived things and all that, but also an understanding of the fact that control um, is have a look at, do you really need to control an outcome? Does it really matter if you don't have internet? At the end of the day, but you get yourself into such a little state thinking that it does matter,
mm,
and I could have become, once upon a time, I could have cancelled the podcast from the state that I was getting myself into. So, yeah, I think it's important to recognize even where that control plays a part.
mm.
What do you think? Why is it
Yep,
that you wanted to do a podcast on control, for example?
definitely. It was coming up everywhere in my week. I could
Yeah.
see that I had been challenging myself in places where I haven't been comfortable before in playing in, like the trainer training course, the podcast, thinking of the podcast, even as a parent. I'd also had experiences with a client who found that she just couldn't get the opportunity to express herself without someone in her life avoiding that conversation. And I had had that week as well in my family. So it was just, I could see how
So can you
much.
repeat that again with the avoiding? Can you repeat that bit again?
Yep. Well, for example, in my case, there was a topic that I wanted to discuss. And every time I found the opportunity for that and asked the person if they were, in a place to talk about it, even when the conversation was flowing, then I kind of would see that they could use their language to avoid that conversation. And there was a lot of avoiding tactics going on instead of allowing that conversation to just open up into what we needed it to be opening up to. Um, I've done that a lot myself as well throughout my life. And it's this thing that when we have a perceived fear and the pattern is that we've created this coping mechanism, I've found that I've created a coping mechanism where if I want to avoid a topic, I'll do these other things and I'll think that I'm controlling the outcome to not go there.
Hey, you'll think that you're not controlling the outcome to go there.
I think I'm controlling it by not going there, and I'll sit in this control factor as to where the conversation can go. And sometimes we need to. Sometimes we need to feel like certain questions aren't available. Certain questions you don't want to talk about it. Like if you're about to go on stage and present, you're not going to get into a topic of how do you feel about this sad moment in your life and go in onto the stage in that state. You're not going to do that to yourself. You want to be useful, like today. You want it to be useful. You want it to be able to get to the task and not have to worry about what feelings were coming up right at that moment. I mean, we don't always have the luxury of going into the feelings that are arising because of responsibilities and things like that. Say you were running a meeting and it's just not useful to go into a state that's not going to be useful for the meeting. You know what I mean?
I do. That's what I'm hearing with your client. I think her avoidant tactic, even she was controlling potentially not going into a place that she was unsafe. Now, whether she was aware of that or not, I have no idea. But it sounds like that she was avoiding going into feelings that were going to make her feel uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
or an understanding that she wasn't going to be able to understand, or something along those lines. So controlling it, you can
Yeah.
see where control comes in to avoid feeling unsafe potentially. Is that what you're saying?
In both her state and her partner's state, because he was avoiding. He had different coping mechanisms of avoiding and distracting to not go into conversation, and she had other ones. So
Yeah.
it was limiting the opportunity for them to come closer, for them to be able to talk about things.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I've many times when you and I have had sessions, I can feel in my body trying to avoid something. You know, there's you might ask me a question to get me to explore something, you know, something that's come up. And there's times when I can feel it. Oh, I don't want to go to that. You know, I don't want to go to that, whether it's because I'm not ready or.
Yeah, might not be ready.
So where control is concerned then, is that more control as a protective mechanism? Are you talking about, or an avoidance mechanism, or both?
Both potentially. So where do you think control is good?
Well, in that scenario, it's good to, if you are not ready, say, or if you don't want to, like you said, we don't always have the luxury, it might be that, or we also don't want to face certain emotions, so we might avoid moving in a certain direction, and we do control the outcome for that reason. Despite the fact that they might be there, or I might be there with you to have coaching, sometimes you get to that point where you can actually maybe have a look at something, but are just way too afraid to.
And do you think it could be about not being ready as well?
It could be. It just depends on the individual. It really could be. It could be. I mean, if you're ready, say, this is what my thinking on it. Sometimes when I have a session with you, even though I think I'm ready, when I get to the thing, like some things, not everything, when I get to a point that we're trying to address or something that we're trying to look at, there's something in me that just says, no, 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 I'm not ready, you know?
Yeah.
And in that sense, you control the outcome. You're not ready. But, and sometimes they might be.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. There could be a factor of things. It could even be how we approach it as a coach versus that person. You know, there's so many factors, I think.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, Misha, because you and I have done so much work throughout the years and we feel really comfortable with each other. So there's a big safety factor when we approach things. Still, we might not be ready to talk about everything. But I think because we've established that safety, you and I, we often go to places that are pretty edgy.
And you're right. I mean, there's that trust factor and safety, because I know how you operate in terms of, you know, where we're going to go to, what we're going to get to, what the results will be, all that sort of stuff. And there's safety in that, in a way, because I know the process, what it's roughly going to look like. And knowing that at the end of that, it's all going to be okay. You know, because we've worked through those things so many times.
It's happened before.
Yeah, it's happened before.
But that's not often with other people.
No.
We haven't created safety with. So this control thing that we might be seeing, you know, it could be that not enough safety has been established.
It could be. Yep. And it just depends, again, on the individual, on it, because I've had clients that will just go there, they feel safe immediately, whether it's the rapport that we have between us, or, you know, or the level of connection or resonance. And then there's some people, whether it's the fact that they're just not ready. And I feel that resistance, that real control. Yeah. I mean, I can feel it with some clients. There's just no lid is going to open. You know, there's no, you know, and it's like they know that they want to do something, but they're not sure what it is. And in terms of control, you can see the kinds of stories they're putting in place to prevent them from opening up, which is essentially what I feel like you're kind of talking about there too with your clients. You can, like, avoidance tactics,
Yeah.
distraction methods, the kinds of things that they can use, and or the stories that they can tell themselves. And one of them could even be, this coach is no good. And
Yeah.
so therefore, and I think there's a lot of factors that are come into place there. Not just, there could be lots of reasons, really. But it's kind of all fear-based, because if you're coming to have sessions with people, it would suggest that there's somewhere you want to go with it. There's something you want to unveil.
That's true. It's something that they are coming for. Might not be where they thought they were going to go with it. Sometimes people come for this, but there's something deeper, or a deeper need that they haven't touched base with. And so when we go there, they weren't prepared for that level of exposure, vulnerability. And then we get these distracting coping mechanisms and things like that, which are fine. We understand them. And that leads me to think about the question last night when we had a chat. I was telling you about the Star Trek. One of the Star Trek principles is the prime directive, if you're a Star Trek fan. And basically means you don't get involved with people's development unless they're ready for it. And you certainly don't show. It's not so much that you don't show how far they can go, but you don't push them through development before they're ready. It's almost like trying to push a flower to open and bloom without it doing that naturally.
So are you talking about control where a coach is concerned then, in that case?
Yeah, that's coming up for me, not so much as a coach, but as a parent. We try and push our kids into developing and maturing earlier than they're ready for. And I kind of get stuck in that. And that's where controls come up in my life over the recent months, because when I feel there's two things happening. When I feel I want to see more maturity and they're really not ready, and when the kids or my teens want me to see that they are ready, and I'm controlling that from the other side because I'm not feeling safe to see them be ready. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. Are you talking about sort of like behaviors or habits, or just that they might start taking on or displaying or something like that, or just and you're not ready for them to let go of the control or the hold over, because you're not ready to let go of it and just allow them to have the experience because of what fear it's going to bring up for you, in terms of, or it's bringing up fear in terms of what's going to happen to them. So you want to control it? Is that what you mean?
Yes. Especially with my daughter at the moment. The topic at the moment's alcohol, and she's only 16, but apparently everybody in the world is drinking, and their parents let them. Their parents go and buy alcohol for them. I'm the only one apparently in the world that doesn't allow it. And like, if we're at home and she wants a sip of my drink, or she wants a glass of something that we're having, I'm cool. It's when I'm hearing about the parties where everyone's drinking and there's hardly any supervision, and she's like constantly saying to me, "You're just trying to control me." And I know when she's saying that, there is a part of me that is, because I'm thinking the legalities around teens drinking. I'm thinking about developmental issues. I'm also thinking, I don't want that. I don't want to be scared and not know what's going on over there when everybody is drinking and nobody's responsible. And so there's a big fear in me that doesn't want to let that happen yet. And then so I go into, well, you're not mature enough, and you know, so yeah, that's been very present, and I can see myself, and I'm trying to control it, and I can see my dysregulation starting to happen, and I'm thinking, okay, this is not just about you, because your dysregulation, that fear around it, is affecting your daughter.
Yeah, and so my question would be, is that kind of control okay? And how long can that go on for, do you think? As in this so-called control over your children, how long can that go for?
Well, how long can it go for? I think that can go on indefinitely. If I'm to still keep resisting it, if I'm
Yeah.
still to resist her growth, that it would just mean that we would end up being on different pages all the time. We would be arguing, and it's just not going to be a pleasant relationship. And then
Just
I
resist
also,
her growth and resist your growth too.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
just
Mm.
because of the fear of what might happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Is that kind of control okay, do you think?
look, it's where I'm at. It doesn't, I don't think, I suppose, yes, it's okay, because it's where I'm at, and I'm transitioning through it slowly. I'm open to more dialogue with her.
Mm.
And I want her to be able to drive this as well, because it's about her and her body. I can't dictate what's okay for her.
Yeah. And why do you think, like, in terms of control, what just came up was, do you think that when it's not okay is simply because we're trying to control the outcome? Like, I've got to get it right as a parent.
Could
So
be.
therefore, I don't know, it's just something that we
Yeah.
could discuss. But I think when we, like, you've got a process, say, and
Mm,
it's not like you don't try to go through them. You don't sit there like a frog on a log, and let the
mm,
world go by. That's another discussion. But
mm-hmm,
but you recognize that there's a growth opportunity there,
mm.
but you've got to be ready for it, right? I
That's
mean, you
right.
recognize that intellectually, but there's still a process you have to go through.
Yeah. Look, I am okay with where I'm at with it, because I'm not going to be pushing myself through just to have her get what she wants. I'm kind of allowing the dialogue, and I'm allowing the conversation, so we both understand. And yesterday in the conversation with her, there was something that came up for me when I was kind of going, okay, what's the need? What's the need inside me to resist this? And it wasn't just that, it was kind of like a loyalty for her, to her. I wanted to not, because I've known what it's like to be a teenager, but I feel that life today is so fast. Teenagers are trying to grow up so quickly, and look, it probably happened for us too, but I don't think at that pace. I don't think it happened at that pace for me. And it's almost like she's gone from 12 to 25 really quickly. And so I said to her, you know what I feel? I said, I feel like I just want you to feel what it's like to be 16 and to be 17 without you going from 12 to 25. And she's already doing an apprenticeship. So to me, it feels like, wow, she's already got so much responsibility. Where's the fun part of being just a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old
Well,
without
she thinks it's getting drunk with her friends. That's the fun part.
and it is that
Yeah.
too, but not all the
Mm,
time and not every weekend in my eyes. And she
mm.
says, Mum, it's not, your world is not my world. And it's so true. I do feel like I'm imposing some of my world onto her, but there's also wisdom that comes from parenting. And there's this wisdom that we know what it's like to push through and grow up very quickly and then go, what happened? I can't even remember being 14, Whereas I'm not sure I'm speaking on your behalf, but my 14 and 15 was really long. I felt those years. I had so much fun in discovering things, and she is too. So yeah, it just was something that I discovered about me yesterday when I was looking for what's the need behind this so-called control of over Alex's body.
And I have something similar with my own 13-year-old, that where I am not ready for him to have a phone, a mobile phone. I'm just not. I feel like he's got technology, he's got it's enough technology. It's so captivating. And mine's a similar quandary in the sense where I want my son to experience life, not just this a what's that word, like a online life, not like this just computerized world. There's actually, we're living, in a reality here that's a living, breathing nature reality as well. There's people, there's life going on. And it's so my issue around him having a mobile phone is he really doesn't need one, but he'll only be getting one because that's what everybody else is doing. Now, he is only one of, say, two of his other mates that don't have phones. All of the other kids do. Now, I don't care. There's no judgment. Anybody can do whatever they want with their children. And this is what I've said to him, but I want you to experience life as well. And I feel like I have a responsibility as your parent in this experience to help moderate that, to help balance it out. Otherwise, why would you even need a parent? Why don't you just, and there can be all sorts of discussions around that in terms of control. And there are, and certainly somebody could tell me I'm being controlling. But I just feel like this is my experience and my son's experience. And I have an open dialogue too, like you do with your daughter. And we discuss these things and I let him see where my fears are. And I tell him, these are my fears. And I try to move through them at my pace. And then I listen to him as well and come towards his direction as well. And I've thought about this in terms of control, and sometimes I even have pangs of guilt, just thinking, well, not sometimes, a lot. Oh my God, am I going to damage my son because of all of the controlling elements that I have, as a parent? But then I sort of just have to let it go and recognize that this is where I am and this is where he's at and this is our experience together. And sometimes let go of that outcome. I think the control element comes in when I start to feel guilty that I'm trying to control something.
What do you think that guilt rising is speaking to?
Controlling an outcome. It's kind of like oh God, there's so many things, like how's his life going to turn out? Taking responsibility for how his life is going to turn out. So the guilt comes up. I'm going to mess it up. There's going to be repercussions for my controlling ways. All those things. And I can reflect on that because if we look back on our own lives, we can see how when our parents controlled outcomes for us, they had, well, you could call it detrimental, that's one word, but there were effects that we've had to work through as adults. We've had to work through conditioning and, the effects of parents controlling outcomes for us. And without even considering our perspective, scenario, situation, we've actually had to, as adults, work through a lot of that stuff.
Are you willing to share anything that you're thinking about where where your parents would have been concerned?
Yeah, I think a good example that's come up for me lately is when there's several elements of control and how control looks here is I suppose growing up we moved around a lot. My mum, you know, we just moved around a lot. There was a lot of schools, a lot of homes, a lot of different countries, you know, towns. I've lived in hundreds of different homes, and I think 100, yeah, it's getting up there.
Did you feel like you got a say in that, Misha?
No, and that's my point. I think there was no consideration. There was no collaboration, or just where are you with all of this? You know, there was no discussion. It was never up for debate. And so as a result, as I've gotten older, I think I've had to try and learn how to use my voice, my own voice, and try to understand who's in there, you know, because I was actually conditioned to not be present, to not be in there, to not have a voice. And if I did, there were repercussions, you know, there was guilt, or there was, you know, shame, or all those things.
Consequences
For having opinions or voices, or, you know. And so as an adult, I've probably had to try to find that voice, and, you know, all those sorts of things. So but also then, as a result, I've controlled my own voice a lot growing up. Really, just don't speak, don't do that, don't say that, don't acknowledge your emotions, don't. There's been a lot of rules put in place, and all of them are control based, so that I don't, I avoid confrontation, I avoid punishment, I avoid shame, guilt, all those things, all those emotions. So I've been absolutely proficient, skilled at controlling so many parts of myself. So I think, and that could be for many reasons, but certainly even punishment tactics when you're growing up, you know, parents, in terms of controlling, if you misbehave, especially in our generation, you misbehave, you were punished severely in some cases. So and again, that's trying to control an outcome, to control a behavior in a child. But all it really did was force me to repress and suppress anything that came up, really, anything that came up within myself.
So your parent may have modeled that from their parent, and if you haven't modeled that, because you're trying to do it differently, you're trying to.
Well, I did model it, because I parented that way initially. I was quite severe, quite very controlling, there was a lot of anger, a lot of repressed anger and stuff as a parent. So I would say definitely in those formative years of my own son, I did model those things, and they did play out again as a parent in the early days.
So when did it change?
You know, it changed when I started to notice the repercussions it was having on my own child. And it didn't feel right in the body. Despite how even society would say to do things in terms of parenting, I started going, well, that doesn't feel right. Just doesn't feel right.
So similarly to my daughter and I, when I see that we're constantly arguing and we're trying to both get our points across, then we're kind of more open to discussing it, and then we're also more open to, with ourselves, just to notice what's coming up in the body. When you have changed it because you've seen some repercussions, what have you put in place, or where did it begin for you?
Where did it begin? Meaning, where did the noticing begin?
Did you start noticing? Did you start noticing that there was control first? Did you start noticing that you were getting angry, or did you notice that there was something in the body that was resisting it?
Yeah, all of those things. I started noticing anger. I started noticing his response. I started realizing that I was trying to control his behaviors and his all sorts of, and noticing what kind of detrimental effects that was actually having on him, noticing that I was actually just conditioning a child rather than trying to see the child for and allow the child to just be, you know, who he is or what he's doing, and that's another discussion altogether. But I just noticed the repercussions that kind of control was having. And like you just said, arguing, fighting,
Mm,
resistant, all those things. They were like, I kept thinking, this can't be right.
mm,
It can't be right to have this level of resistance and anger and fighting and yelling, and that can't be right. So there has to be another way.
yeah.
And I think when we continue down that path of fighting, arguing, it does actually suggest that there's an element of control going on and in both circumstances. But I think where the adult's concerned, we probably have more tools to be able to work out, hey, hang on, something has to change here, rather than expect the child to change.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's because that's what we're trying to do. Essentially, we're trying to control the child and make them conform to our will.
Yeah.
And then when there's so much resistance, I started going, oh, hang on. This is just meeting with more resistance. There's got to be another way. I have to be able to look at this from another perspective, which was me.
Yes.
Like,
That's the only one we can change.
yeah, like what am I expecting out of this? All those questions started to arise.
Yeah. I remember having sessions with you when Alex would come into the room to already discuss something that was going to be uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
And I used to say to you, I go into like this, like I feel pressured. I feel like she's got me in the corner or against the wall, that was my body. And I remember discussing this with you. And I learned to that was the first place where it started to change for me, because you made it abundantly clear, like what was happening in your body first. Forget about Alex. What started to happen with you? Why were you feeling pressure?
Mm.
And so I really remember that moment when I started to look at what was happening for me first, and the pressure, perhaps, to do the right thing in this moment, the pressure that I'm going to get asked to be okay with something I'm not okay with. And my body was giving off that signal first. So, what I started to do, just as a test, was when Alex would come in to say, Mum, there's a party coming up this weekend. And I would just my body would start getting rigid. And I'd say, can you give me 5 minutes? And I'll come and talk to you about it in a sec. So I'd buy time. I'd buy time. And that was superb, because then I could deal with what was happening in me first. Like, because I was already getting rigid and starting to say, how am I going to say no to drinking? How am I going to say no to this stuff?
Mm.
But because I bought time, I could deal with my crap first. I could deal with
Mm.
all my dysregulation that probably would have ended up on Alex.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point that you're moving into about how can we notice, like when we're trying to control the situation, which I would like really, I think is really useful to discuss. But also one thing that I noticed in discussions last week about control as well is that there's so many different ways that control comes up. Like it's like I just said at the beginning of this discussion. So we've just highlighted obvious ways, especially where parenting is concerned. I think that's really obvious about, we can all say that, how we were controlled by our parents, and the repercussions that's had.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see that in our own parenting now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to work through ways of being, say, less controlling. But we're also highlighted how control is positive for us. I mean, it's just a word. It points to an action, and the action has arisen because of fears that we might have. And there's processes that we have to go to, through and all that sort of stuff to understand that fear. so we can understand all of that. One of the things that I've really been really quite surprised about where control is concerned is what you pointed to earlier is the avoidance, like how we use it, and we don't even realize that actually what we're focusing on, like we're so engrossed in focusing on a particular thing, it captures us, you know, it like totally captures us like a moth to a flame in a way, that we don't actually realize that while we're focusing really hardcore on that particular thing, it is actually a control strategy to avoid facing the bigger things that we need to. That's probably been one of the greatest ways that control has showed up for me more recently, where it works at such a deeper layer, deeper level, that that's been something that's really come to my attention lately.
What's been so insightful for you in that, noticing the deeper layer, or that avoidance of where what I'm guessing is that fixation point? Is that what you're talking about? When you get fixed on control, fixed on one outcome, fixed on or avoiding?
Yeah, it's the fixation's a good way of putting it, because whatever it is, it might be different for different people what that fixation is. But and like avoidance has been such a flippant thing for such a long time. Oh, I'm avoiding. And I suppose it's just something we all understand. If we're avoiding, it's because we don't want to face something, you know, that we know we may have to in our own development in order to move into a more, you know, into greater possibilities, you know, whatever that is. So
yeah,
we avoid it.
I definitely understand, and it resonates in terms of relationships. I've been in a really long-term relationship with my hubby, going on about 27 years together. And I was thinking about this yesterday, because I was thinking, how has that shown up? But it shows up differently as you move through stages of your life, because you never have the same relationship. I'm not in the same relationship that I was with Paul that we started with. So every time we've moved into some growth or into something that we've worked on, myself, for example, then the relationship is a completely different relationship. So my point is, when I've moved into something and changed the pattern, for example, where I'm trying to control, I'll give you an example, when I'm trying to control how my house looks. Don't leave things on the floor. Don't do this. Don't do that, you know, because I like to see neatness or whatever. If I've understood why that's there, then I can change it, and I've let go of that pattern. But if I've tried to control people around what I want to see, I'm avoiding looking at the pattern that's been playing out in my life for a very long time. Is this making sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I don't avoid it and I go, all right, what is this bullshit about? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? Why do I need to see this? Then understand what my body's saying, understanding what I need behind that. Then I can probably get that need without having to do that to people.
Yeah.
You know, and then I've cut and I've broken that pattern that I've done for a very long time. And now suddenly there's a different dynamic, a different relationship that we're in, that I'm in with everyone else again. It's a new thing. So what I'm saying is, I don't need to completely change myself, and I don't need them to completely change. But if I've altered a pattern by not avoiding, not controlling people, because the control is just the avoiding tactic in some circumstances, then I've been willing to look at a pattern and change it. So, but if I don't do that and the pattern continues, I've stopped any growth from happening.
Yeah.
Does that resonate for you?
Habit. But what I'm thinking where control is concerned is that we're still trying to control the outcome because you're staying fixated on this habit. It's a safer place to be, to beat yourself up. That way you don't actually have to take responsibility and change the way you do things, because it's a lot of work to get out of the habit of we've talked about lack mentality, or of just that one where you beat yourself up, that inner critic. It's such a habit, ingrained habit. It's really difficult to try and, but so the avoidance comes in, I don't want to do the work. They don't actually consciously think that, but the control element is, I'm going to just stay fixated on this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what I'm hearing from you is that they've found a way, they've found a strategy that's worked for them, supposedly, to avoid something else. But instead of looking at other strategies, they've just keep repeating the same one because it's worked.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's worked once or twice, but it's not become useful anymore. In fact, it's hurting them.
Yeah, I think that there's a belief in there that the purgatory around it, the self-recrimination, the inner critic, that's actually solving the problem. It's like, surely I will come to a problem if I just punish myself enough over this. I'll come to a solution. Does that make sense? But it's still like, it's a very convoluted way of looking at control. But in a way, if you can't budge from a thing, there's an element, something in there controlling the outcome. You're wanting to just keep fixated on a thing. And do you think I'm going at a stretch here, or does that make any sense to you? I was trying to look at
it does, and it reminds me of that story that we spoke about last week, where the man that lives near the river.
Yes. Yeah.
The man that lives near the river, and because he wants to control the water, the flow, and Mother Nature, he builds a dam so he can control where the water goes. But of course, it's wild and it does what it likes. And he's constantly having to stay on top of it, amend it, fix it, change it. But he's still trying to control the river through the dam, instead of saying, okay, the river's wild and I should learn all of the ways to live with this wildness, instead of trying to control it through the dam. And what I hear in your story is they've got this way of staying in control, but only ever using that one strategy, like the dam, instead of, if you didn't have the dam, you could just learn all of the flexible ways and all of the other ways that you don't know you could have learned if you didn't have the dam. So your options open up, and your skills as well. Like you get more resilient.
So would you say that there's comfort? You just mentioned that before. There's a real comfort in just sticking with that same strategy. You stick with that strategy, even though it's harmful and not useful, and harmful to self and not useful. It's harmful in the sense that you're devaluing yourself. Your esteem is staying low, your self-esteem.
Yes, I like that. You're keeping yourself small. I don't like that part. But you are essentially keeping yourself small by just using the one strategy, instead of looking at options and allowing life to teach you all of the ways that you could be. And you could discover that you're so many things and you've got so many tools, but you can't discover that because you're only going to try and control the dam instead.
And it's growing up, isn't it? Like if you allow yourself to move away from that one strategy all the time, you're actually kind of growing up. You're kind of growing yourself, is probably a better way of putting it, because there's so many connotations around growing up. You got to grow up, but it's really just growing self. And there's a lot of responsibility that comes with growing self as well. So it's kind of like that, controlling the outcome of becoming more responsible. I don't want to be more responsible. I want to keep being this way. I'm not saying it's a conscious thought. It certainly isn't. It's unconscious in terms of shadow work that you mentioned earlier. It's an unconscious driver. It's the the shadow potentially could be, I don't want to grow up. I want to stay in this state.
Yeah.
I want to be protected. And in order to do that, I have to be helpless.
Has that state, you think, created a false safety?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it is a false safety because I mean, it's safe in that you can stay in the same patterns over and over again. So whatever pattern you're living in, and however this particular person has safety, protection in that constant state of I'm focusing on how they in lack or whatever, they can keep that pattern going over and over and over again. But then I know for a fact that that pattern also prevents them from expanding in ways that they would like to expand.
Yeah, that growing up that you're talking
Yes.
about.
Yeah.
When you don't need to stay in safety, you don't need to stay holding mummy's leg and her skirt. You can actually start to explore what else is out there. What else can I do without? But you can still run to safety. You can still use it when you need to, but it's just taking that step out from mummy's skirt, from having that safety, and just stepping out and testing and saying, hang on, it's okay. It's okay to do a podcast, Jess. It's okay. It's okay
the
to
internet doesn't work. It's okay that the internet doesn't work, Misha. You'll be fine. You're not going to fall into a heap.
So what do you think, Misha, about because I have, even with a client this week, it's been kind of really evident that people don't want to step away from safety, even though that's where the healthiest part of them is going to come from.
Yeah. I think as coaches, we may want to try and control the outcome where that's concerned. Like we all want to see that we're being effective and we're affecting change. It may be like in that particular scenario that I just talked about. It may be that we just try to help or, recognize, even through having discussions like this, hey, you're going about things one way, but maybe there's another way. And that's probably the best that we can do. And some people are ready to have a look, and some aren't. And we relinquish control in the outcome by just offering up these options, and different ways that you and I both do that. And we're both very good at that. You've certainly helped me many, many times look at things in a different way. And it may be that they look or they may not. And same with us. We may look or we may not.
I think you've said it, like we are there and provide those options that they're not seeing in that fixation.
Yep.
Because I remember the moment, and I've shared this with you, when I had to go up front in Amy's class and demonstrate a process, and my whole body was like, start feeling sick or something, run away, go home, you get out of the room. Like I was there and I was witnessing my body going into that strategy.
Yeah.
Get out of here quickly. Tell Amy you have to leave. And I shared that with Amy. I said, look, this is what's happening. My body's saying I have to leave. And she was like, okay, you don't have to get up there, but you're right here in this moment. She goes, not physically, but literally, you can take my hand and we can go up and see what happens. Just have fun. So I was in that moment. It was like time slowed down. Time was so slow. And I was in that, what we call in Enneagram, that Shenpa moment, where I had, what about the shame that could happen here? All the shame that's going to happen around not being good enough, making mistakes, making a fool of myself. Which, in fact, I don't really mind making a fool of myself. I do that often. But I don't know, there was this shame factor that was coming up for me, of not getting it right, not being the best, and not damaging people in the process, because I'm learning. I didn't want to just teach the wrong thing. But it was time slowed down and I was there and I saw the options. Okay, that's what your body does want to do. But what if you don't do that anymore? What if you do this other thing and just
Yeah.
try and have fun, even though your whole body's feeling hijacked?
So where does control come into that? And also, I also want to touch on control where you said about not teaching the right thing, but we'll come back to that. Where does control sit with that?
I think the control was me keeping safe, my body going to this whole fight flight mode, wanting to run or just stay here and freeze so Amy wouldn't see me, try and look really small. But it was my moment to try something new, try something different for me, even though I was terrified. And the control, if I had allowed control to take over, I wouldn't have gone any further with it. But I noticed it in the moment and I said, no, I know what you're doing, but you actually want this. This is on the other side of having done it. It's going to feel great.
So when you say not allowing control to take over, are you talking about the fight or flight? So you're not allowing that. So
Yeah.
do you think there's an element of control too then when we let fight or flight take over? It's like if we sink into it, allow it to, what's the control part of fight or flight?
The fight or flight's there to keep you safe, right?
Yeah.
And it's a pattern that I've done repeatedly. So if I wanted to keep doing that dam, controlling the dam, that would have been me allowing control to take over.
Yeah.
To stay safe, to stay small.
So you're saying that in a way, in our modern society, because we've talked about, well, people constantly nowadays talking about fight or flight being like a flow on from when we used to run from tigers or whatever. But now we're not running from tigers. Like we perceive a threat all the time. So
absolutely, it was a perceived threat. I wasn't in danger.
So do you think again, the control element though is just allowing that perceive to continue on with the pattern? It's
continue that pattern that's made me
perception.
safe. Yeah.
Okay.
And to just use, it's just a strategy.
Yeah. Okay.
It was a strategy I've used before and it's worked. So that was the moment where time slowed for me and I saw the pattern. And I thought, okay, I could either use the same pattern and run away and not have this moment of growth, or I could see it and go, nah, I'm not in danger. I'm not going to use it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. And there's, I can see that we definitely can, where you've just pointed out the noticing, that's, we're obviously really going to go there in this because that's a key point to moving past control, but we just touch on it. But the one more thing I thought just before was when you talked about you don't want to stuff it up in terms of for other people.
Yeah.
So it's almost, where does control come in there, for example? Like
two ways for me. One way is that I have a standard that I've created so that I don't shame myself. So I perceive to have a very high standard and I want to be competent. So I want to offer something of good quality. And then secondly, if I am offering good quality, then I can control the way people see me.
And what about a third way? Controlling their experience.
Well, that's in the way that I'm doing my demonstrating. So if I perceive it to be of a very high competence, then I'm also controlling that the way they're experiencing me as a person of high competence.
Yep. And also controlling their learning experiences in, if you stuff up, they can learn from that too.
Yeah. Well, I've learned that too, because when I see Amy make mistakes every now and then, I'm just like, oh, she's human. I'm okay. I can make a mistake too.
Yeah. And they can learn from those.
Yeah.
Like that's, the things like you just said, you've sometimes when you see it, say with Amy, you might actually devise strategy with your own strategies. Oh, did that happen? This happened, that happened. And yes, but also it gives you that comfort of saying, good, she's human, you
Yeah.
know, and then I can be human in this experience as well.
Yeah.
So, and no doubt Amy would allow for people or you or people that, you know, to see those things so that you can learn from those things as well, because she realizes the value in it. And I suppose that just takes time for us to be okay. And you mentioned it earlier, and you are getting really okay with like the cringy stuff. Oh, I just did that. Egg on your face. Oh, I look like a, but you kind of learn to go, okay, well, that's good, because that's a human element and people can learn from that too, not just, you know, NLP strategies.
Yeah. Well, you want to demonstrate the NLP process
That's the
correctly,
intention.
because they're
Yeah.
there to learn. But
Yeah.
if you get it wrong, it's okay to go,
Yeah.
sorry, I've just taught this all wrong. Start back
Yeah.
from zero. Let's start again.
Yeah. 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 Interesting.
Because you're right. I'm actually teaching them in that respect that it's okay. We're not perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think working up at a school too, I do notice that with a lot of teachers, they put a lot of pressure on themselves to they just put a lot of pressure on themselves to get it right, you know, let alone all the kinds of pressures that are in schools nowadays. But yeah, there is a lot of you know, I mean, they've got all of these people's futures in their hands, I suppose, and it's a big. So, like you just said, I mean, they're there to learn the curriculum and all that sort of stuff, and so it's their job, I suppose, to teach that in an effective and a, you know, an efficient way. But there's still a lot of pressure that comes with that.
Geez, we give ourselves pressure just at home, living, trying to be a good mom, trying to be a good wife, trying to be a good friend, trying to be an owner of a house, like all the pressures of what it takes to maintain a household, and according to what standard, you know. Imagine how hard it is when you get in front of people and you feel that responsibility of giving them the lessons that they're paying for as well, like coaching.
So do you think pressure, and we won't go into pressure too much because that is probably another topic, but do you think that is a symptom of control as well, to some degree or to a large degree, where you just go, oh, I've got to get this right, I've got to do it right, the pressure.
Yeah, and I think that pressure is also a signal, you know, like we were talking about, noticing those signals coming up from the body. Why is this perceived pressure coming in when you're not in danger?
Yeah, so I mean, and so in terms of a strategy, which we again probably don't need to go into on this one because we could do a whole podcast around noticing. That would be awesome, and a good flow on from this discussion. But noticing, how do you know you're controlling? Is probably the question I'm going to ask. How do you know you're in a controlled state or you're trying to control something? Where to the point where it's having detrimental effects, either on yourself or somebody else, where it's not useful, you know, because you've got yourself into such a state. What are the ways that you see or have seen so far in your experience where control, like the question you asked me in the beginning, is where control is actually negative?
I think for me, it's through the body. Because if I'm in control, my body is almost resisting flowing with the current moment that I'm in instead of flowing through it. It feels like I'm putting a wall up, or there's a wall I've got to try and push through. It's rigid, and it's hard. It's difficult.
You get throat things as well. Did you, you know,
Yeah.
do you think that's part of it?
I get the throat thing when I'm fearing I'm going to say the wrong thing, or I'm fearing I'm about to hurt somebody. My body becomes very tight here. Like I'm saying, it's that tightness, it's that rigidity that comes into my body. Because, for example, when Alex will come in and say, Mum, I've got this thing happening. My body's like, oh, perceived pressure. Get it right. How are you going to go against what you want? All these things. And so, but my body signals it first. So if I can buy time and say, look, give me 5 minutes and I'll come and talk to you about it, I'm essentially giving myself time to notice, why I'm rigid, why I'm getting like that, why I'm feeling fear, why I want to stay safe when there isn't any danger. But my body gives me that signal that you're rigid at the moment. It's getting difficult. Things are tightening up everywhere.
Yeah, so that's how it shows up for you in your body.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's how I know that I'm trying to control instead of just flowing and allowing.
Mm.
Yesterday in a conversation, I felt my body go into that. And I was kind of saying to myself, it's okay. We're just talking. It doesn't need to get to an outcome. We don't need to agree on anything. We're just talking. And my body just started to ease and it just started to flow. And I didn't allow myself to get out of control or start like I didn't allow myself to go into fear when there was nothing to fear in the moment.
Mm. Yeah. The other thing I've noticed, where control, where control might be a factor and something to consider, is when there's, like you and I touched on it before, conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So when there's continuous conflict and there doesn't,
That arguing going on with.
yeah, whether it's your partner or whether it's your kids or whether it's your friend, it's a
Mm-hmm.
continual conflict, where you just think, we potentially there's control there, and have you looked at another way? You might not have looked at another way because that, I mean, go into blame and all that sort of stuff there. But potentially, are you trying to control something? Are you trying to control an outcome, either myself or that person, whatever? And you would think that if there's two people involved, there is an element of control, whatever that is, and so that's something to potentially have a look at as well.
Mm.
And it's because one side thinks that the other side refuses to see it their way.
Mm.
And so to me, that sounds like controlling, potentially, without looking too deeply into it or actually having those kinds of discussions. Control is there because they want the other person to see it their way. And they think that the other person is in fault because they can't see it their way.
What about also seeing it as this point of view that I have? Yes, I want you to understand it, that it's there, but I also want to control not allowing any information in about another point of view that I might not have considered. What do you think about that aspect of controlling what comes in? Because if you're always constantly controlling what comes in, you're staying rigid in one point of view and not allowing yourself to be flexible in lots of different ways of doing things.
But I think at the individual level, they could start looking at the fact that what is it that they don't want to see, like what you just pointed to, I think. So it's a deeper, more personal level that has to occur of what are they avoiding. It goes back to that, avoiding what don't they want to see within themselves? What are they afraid to look at?
Yeah.
What is the driver behind this need to control what the other person thinks or what the other side thinks or how the other side views it? What's the driver behind that?
Are they avoiding fear from finding out that the other side might be right?
Or potentially, yeah, I've really, I mean, this is again, it could be another conversation. I've really been thinking hard and long about right or wrong where these things are concerned. It could be, yeah, I think that's a matter of perspective, because I think I know lots of different people, and you would too, on, say, two sides of an argument.
Mm-hmm.
And I see the value in both of what people are saying.
Mm.
So I suspect that it goes to several things we pointed to. The focal point has become so rigid. The things that that the avoidance of actually at the individual level of just looking in, hang on, what am I avoiding looking at myself in here? Why am I so rigidly, because they're so focused on right or wrong, but what am I avoiding here? It's an opportunity to look at what's going on for me. Like you just talked about your body, what happens in my body, what's happening in my body, what's that speaking to? Now they would probably say because they're wrong, and and it's making me angry that they just can't see that. There's a default argument all the time. I can't believe they just can't see that. Both sides. What are your fears in there? Because that's essentially what they're trying to, so I'm right and you're wrong.
Mm.
So the control comes in there. It's like, you have to say it my way because you're clearly wrong. And look at all the arguments that I have for this. I've got so many. I've done the research.
Please hear me.
Hardcore. Build that case like you were talking about with the river.
Mm.
Build that dam. Build it hard. Just keep building it. Solid, solid, solid dam.
So do you think that by maintaining the control, I'm right, it just avoids growth?
Yeah, I do. And I think, obviously, and like you and I were discussing earlier, if it's getting to a point where it's not useful, the tactic has to change. If it's getting to the point where it's detrimental, harmful, hurtful, all those things, and putting a huge wedge between you and that person, or you and that other side, or you and that faction, then something about your approach and your strategy has to change. Or else you're just trying to force, and this is usually what happens in history, you force an outcome. And then a certain amount of people, whether it's a minority or whatever, then just has to deal with the forced outcome. Brute force usually does that. And in parenting, we use brute force too, because we are the bigger,
if there are consequences, yeah,
consequences. Anyway, so I think at that deeper level, what you're talking about, it's an opportunity for people to say, in fact, to me, it seems like the only way out of a lot of conflict at the moment is to have a deeper look at just at the individual level, and you can do it collectively like we do. So you discuss these things that we come to, but what's my fear in there? Just have a look at the fear.
Growing. Most of the time.
Yeah, growing.
So from our conversation today, sorry, Misha, from our conversation today, I've basically got that it's a staying in safety strategy most of the time.
Yeah.
On different levels, avoiding feelings, avoiding hearing other points of view, avoiding growing, avoiding learning more opportunities and learning more ways of being with things instead of just using the one strategy. And through NLP, like even what you were talking about, the argument between people, we've got so many options in NLP to look at that through authentic relating, through parts negotiation, through allowing and learning state control, like I did before going into having a chat to my daughter, just learning state control and looking into what I'm feeling, what I'm fearing. Why do I want to stay in safety if I'm not in danger? Those questions, giving myself options, noticing the body, which you said, we could talk about all of these stages in other podcasts. But I think it's been pretty rich, like all of the ways that we see control in our lives. And a lot of people aren't even noticing it. They just live it out.
Well, that's it. I think, like I said earlier, the noticing's, it's essential. And we've both pointed to, again, both noticing and indicators. What's coming up for us? How do we know to notice? What's an indicator to notice? oh, it's my body. My body's really tense. I'm in conflict. I'm arguing a lot. I'm exhausted. This is exasperating me. I'm sad because my child and I keep fighting. All those things are indicators. And I think it's an opportunity, like you say, to start noticing. So I definitely, honestly think indicators and noticing strategies are probably the first step. And then beyond that, all of those NLP strategies that we've talked about and we've learned and we consistently used since we studied it, and you continually study it, how can we use those? And that's going to be a flavor thing, isn't it? Like the individual, what works for an individual, how perception, how can I work? There's so many tools that we can use to work through some of these things once we've actually noticed, hey, this is control. I'm trying to control this outcome and it's not useful. I'm not able to expand. I'm not able to.
And I'm hurting
change.
myself in so many ways.
And
I'm allowing this strategy to hijack.
Yeah, hijack me.
Yeah, I'm allowing this strategy to be the only one I use instead of getting more skills around it. I'm allowing myself to stay stuck instead of growing.
And I'm hurting my child and I'm hurting, they've got their experience too. We can't take the full responsibility, but it's like that old saying, change does happen with us. So if we can, and you see the flow-on effects too. We've discussed this many times, but once I choose and you choose to start noticing, hey, this is no good anymore. I cannot keep going down this track because I want change, and I just don't know how to get it.
I think so we both agree that it comes to a place of choice.
Yep. 100%.
Of choosing to use the same old strategy, to not even noticing it, just going by your business, doing the same thing, or to stop and choose something different.
Yep. And choosing, how can I find out? How can I find ways, not just accepting a status quo? And there's ways out, really easy ways to break patterns and cycles, that we get into. And another indicator is if I'm unhappy, if I want change, if I don't want to continue that path, then what can I do? And you and I know that I've been trying to seek tools for years. Personal development's been a huge thing for me because I've understood this is the way forward for me. This is the way forward.
You and me both.
This is how I can expand. This is how I can become all those things that I want to, all those things that I imagine, all of those things that I desire, all of those things that I, truly have this desire and dreams about. How can I make those things happen? It's not, and it's all little steps, but you just choose, like you say, just choose to try.
So I think that's pretty good. Like we've got to a place where we can notice it and then we've got a choice.
Yeah.
We can just keep playing out the same song or try something different.
And I think that's really what this podcast, the foundation of what it's going to be about, choosing this way or this way, or choosing to look at this or this, what resonates.
And perhaps the next podcast, we can give people tools, like all of the tools that we've been playing with for the past few years, some skills around it, what to do with it. What do you want to do with it? What other
Are you talking about
things?
Tools with control, just having a look at, that's a good idea. Yeah, that would be a good flow on from here, just to noticing and from there on what to do.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, thanks, Misha. Thanks for today.
Yeah, thank you too, Jess. Always amazing.
Always. I'm so happy that we're doing this. And I've shared with you after we did the test run, I was so happy. I was so ecstatic before we got into the control state that we did after it.
Yeah.
Bugger.
But we got past it, didn't we?
We
'Cause here
did,
we are.
because here we are again. So
Mm.
yay, we can celebrate.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, I'll catch you soon at the next one. We'll chat soon.
Okay.
See you,
Cool.
Misha.
See you, Jess. Ciao.
Ciao.